Welcome everybody to our PTC TPG deal webinar. My name is Christopher Sandoval. I'm a developer relations advocate here at FlowFuse. Thanks for joining us. We have a fantastic session today, and it's a really big topic. So the PTC TPG deal, what it means for the industry, and your next move. So if you're a current Kepware or ThingWorx customer, this is going to be like a really critical conversation for you. But even if you don't use these products, I definitely want you to stay tuned because we're going to dive into a lot of things about what this means for the larger industry, the future of industrial automation, and just sort of the flow of everything that's going on. So before we get started, there are a few items of housekeeping I'd just like to throw out. First of all, as I said before we started, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know where you're coming from, and we certainly love to know how this topic is impacting you personally. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded, so we're going to send out this link when it's available. Please use the Q&A panel for any questions, just so we don't miss anything. And finally, at the end, a short survey is going to pop up, so please share your feedback then. That really helps us shape future sessions and make sure that you guys are getting great value. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce the panelists for today's conversation. So first, let's start with ZJ. So ZJ, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. ZJ, CEO at FlowFuse, career-long engineer and now CEO in open source and open source companies. Yeah, that's also how this role came to be, where we are a product around an open source core and market that open source to businesses.
Awesome. And next we have Nick O'Leary. So Nick, go ahead and talk a little bit about you.
Hey everyone, so Nick O'Leary, I'm the CTO here at FlowFuse. I created the nodered project that we build the platform around. So yeah, had a long experience in the open source world and seeing the value that having an open platform brings to its user base. So yeah, super excited for this discussion.
Awesome. And finally, we have Drew Gotti.
Yeah, so my name's Drew Gaddy. I come from the OT engineering space. I've done deployments in PLC, HMI, SCADA, databases, MES, ERP systems, you name it, been across the entire stack. And yeah, so now I'm over here at FlowFuse helping out with solution engineering.
Awesome. And you all know me. I introduced myself. I'm Christopher Sandoval. You've probably seen my face pop up in a million YouTube videos and on Reddit and all over the place. So let me go ahead and set the stage for this conversation because this is a pretty heavy topic. It's multifaceted. There's lots of things going on. So where this thing came to be. So a couple weeks ago, we learned that TPG was acquiring PTC's Kepware and ThingWorx business units. TPG being a private equity group that does a lot of investments, not just in industrial connectivity and IIoT platforms, but all over entertainment, electronics, SaaS software solutions, pretty much everything. The deal was rumored to be somewhere upwards of 600 million. It's now rumored to be upwards of 700 million. So it is an evolving deal for sure. And this news sparked like some pretty heavy conversations about the future of industrial automation and data infrastructure. It was sort of a shock to the industry, to be honest. And it raised a lot of issues around things like vendor lock-in, software strategies, what this means for the sort of like long-term future of companies who are relying on these technologies and relying on these platforms. And honestly, the sale is also super complicated by the buyer themselves. So the buyer in this case is TPG. If anyone is not familiar with them, they are a private equity group that has a reputation a little bit for prioritizing profits, often at the cost of the core user and the user experience. And so when you are a user of something like Kepware and you find out that private equity is buying up your favorite software and they have the reputation that they have, that's a little bit of an alarm bell for everyone involved. And so this obviously caused a lot of concern for existing clients, but also for people concerned with the general industry, vertical integration, and all of those things. So I'm going to give you a little bit more context here. I have a presentation I'd like to share with you. It's only a couple slides, I promise. It's not too long. The question here is, why does FlowFuse and Node-RED, why do we care so much about this? Why is this something that is personal to us? And also, why is the Kepware issue sort of something that we feel very strongly about? So there's a few things here. The first thing is, the Kepware flow in and of itself is not a great flow. It doesn't do a lot for people. This is sort of the reality of it. Kepware promises a lot, but what you get is PLCs generate your data. You're getting all of your data from your machines, and then when you try and bring them into the system, you have super limited and custom drivers and solutions. You are basically locked down to what Kepware decides you should actually get to do. They promise the world, of course, and most closed source proprietary systems do that. They promise the world. But then when you get in there, all of a sudden you realize, well, Kepware is really just a protocol translator. But if you need more, well, they're very happy to sell you Kepware server, and they're very happy to sell you custom solutions. And if none of those work, well, you can go use the external integrations and vendors that they like, that they partner with. And of course, that comes with its own cost. So it very much is like a bait and switch thing. So that is sort of the first reason that we really care, is that this is a really antiquated piece of software. It's really frustrating to use. We kind of think the deal that you're getting as a Kepware consumer is already a raw deal. And obviously, when we built out nodered and then FlowFuse as the sort of next evolution of that, we did not approach our development this way. We said, no, it's your data. You should be able to integrate anything. We have a community of over 5,000 nodes, both for connections and data transformation. You can take your data from anything and transform it into anything because it's your data. You should be able to do that. We don't believe in a black box solution. You actually know what's happening under the hood. And then you can take the nodered stuff and pull it into on-prem and all that, but you can also then use FlowFuse as the cloud solution, adding more devices, doing instance management, all of the things that if you're a Kepware customer, you need to shell out for a pricey control plane, something that now costs you even more thousands of dollars that you weren't told was a problem from the get-go. And oh, by the way, it's actually nice to use. This is the exact same sort of OPC UA reality, but this is, actually a delight to use. It's not something that you're going to sort of hit your head against the wall. And so I said this a minute ago, I'll say it again. We really feel that Kepware users are already getting a raw deal, and to kind of channel Star Wars a little bit, well, now the deal is changed. Like you were getting a bad deal, pray the deal is not altered further, but it is being altered. The reality is that modern problems require modern solutions. They don't require outdated locked-in platforms from 1995, which is what Kepware is. So we feel very strongly about all of this, and within that context, I'd like to pose to this group, with everything that we know, all of what we feel about what we're dealing with here, what were your initial reactions to this sale? How did you feel about it?
So there were some gossips going around that this was gonna happen. For the customer, it must have been a surprise, but it wasn't for some insiders. It gave some pause on like, why is it being sold? If it was the best performing piece of software you were selling, it would have been surprising to sell that off. For PTC to focus on PLM, that is definitely one of the plays. But it also was sort of a judgment on their product portfolio and where they were going.
Yeah, Nick, Drew, how'd you respond to this this big shakeup?
I think it's always going to be interesting to see, what happens next. So, with any sort of sell-off or acquisition, it's what are the market forces driving that, and what are the technology forces driving that? Is it a lack of investment, or is it a lack of growth in that? Or is it looking for a path to grow the investment and the future of those product stacks? And I think that's part of the conversation to be had, as to what having a node like TPG means for the day-to-day of those technologies.
Yeah. Andrew, I know you had a lot of experience working with Kepware in the past. What was your sort of newsflash reaction?
So for me, it's kind of a letdown, actually, because one of the big bets of why people choose Rockwell or Siemens or whatever for just automation in general is the concept of long-term obsolescence. So Kepware's owned or PTC's owned Kepware for 10 years, I think. So it's a big letdown for people who are looking at this as a critical piece of architecture.
I definitely had the same exact sort of feeling, especially and I've said this a couple times, it felt like Kepware was already, as a user, you were getting a raw deal, and then this sort of came out of nowhere, but not out of nowhere. And it was like, oh, it almost felt like an eventuality. And so with that, like in your mind, specifically ZJ, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. The private equity of it. Like that is the big question. People have really strong feelings about private equity. They feel whether it's justified or not, they seem really worried about it. And, given how Kepware has positioned itself historically and had confusing product offerings and all of that, I do wonder, do you see this as sort of the eventual thing as part of a larger trend, or is this just a blip in the ocean, so to speak?
Private equity has long been an exit for owners of any business. The way it's nice for business owners to have an escape, or at least to have exit capital available, and also for current stockholders, or for example, PTC to focus on what they assume that they can do better than they are now and focus on PLM. For if you're being bought by PE, that means private equity loans money from third parties, gets that money invested into companies, and obviously they need to pay that money. They need to pay themselves, and that means that capital and the cost of that capital needs to be coming from somewhere. If it is a rapidly growing business, you can probably just keep on with the same playbook and then just roll that out. And so the question really is, how fast was Kepware and ThingWorx as well? Like how quick were they growing? Were they still very relevant in the market and being deployed as the default? Or was this a sort of exit for PTC? And then there is a financial bill to be paid by the customers in the future. Generally, if you take one of these investments over the next 10 years, the cost of money is at the very least 30-40%, because you got to pay the capital, you got to pay the new private equity owner. And so say you keep the number of customers equal, then you need to be performing much better than you were, because otherwise it's not worth the time and the effort, and you need to pay that capital. It's a quite expensive way to be customer and to have the pleasure of using Kepware and ThingWorx if there is no customer growth. And so the big question is really, how are they able to grow the product so it remains relevant, then also grow the customer base, and if they don't, then you'll see price increases to make it worth their investments, which are probably double digits and hard to swallow.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder as well. I mean, as these things are getting consolidated and it seems like the future is so unknown, especially with cost basis and with all the costs of running these things. And Drew, I'd like to get your read on this. Do you feel like this is now sort of creating a rapidly deteriorating slate of options? Because it did feel for a long time like you had these great options, but there it was sort of a closed source batch of options and a proprietary and versus an open source. But now it seems like everything is consolidating, and I feel like that's why this move scared a lot of people. Is that something that you're seeing kind of in the wild?
Yeah, I think for me, this consolidation, I mean, first of all, nobody starts with Kepware in a greenfield. So automatically, this is already kind of an afterthought kind of product. And for a long time, it's been something that was the only option. So it's nice to see a lot of other companies are coming out with more options and the ability to use other softwares. And it's not just, this one thing solving this one solution. You only have one option now. So I think it's really helping customers be like, okay, maybe we should look at other options and see what else is out there that solves not only this problem, but some other problems that they may be having at the lower levels in the stack.
Now, speaking of other options, I think that's sort of the other big thing that this is leveled in people's heads is that the elephant in the room of open source. This idea of there are these closed source proprietary things, but you lose control. And so obviously like something like this feels like it was inevitable. Whereas something that is open source and maybe a little bit more transparent, that is less of a thing. And so, Nick, this is probably something sort of in your wheelhouse. Do you feel like this has now raised that question to a broader audience of, do you really have to use a closed source proprietary thing? And is that even smart?
I mean, for sure. I think there's there's always that toss up between closed source and open source. Yeah, to be fair, both have strengths, both have weaknesses, but certainly from our perspective, the open source angle gives a lot more, should we say, flexibility and visibility about what it is you're able to do and what freedoms you have, and you aren't operating at the whim of an individual organization, regardless of the quality of the closed source they produce. That trade-off is you are restricted to what they are electing to invest in, and certainly with a move like this, it's it's not clear yet. It's super early days for this deal, but it does raise that question in terms of visibility of what does this mean in terms of their continued investment and functionality. And when you compare that with an open source solution where there is more community built around it and able to respond to requests perhaps more agilely because of that community visibility, and also that you aren't necessarily then locked into a particular technology choice along the way. But yeah, it's not necessarily clear cut, but I think it is very a pertinent question at this time for customers.
What I find really interesting about this entire sale, what's been happening and all the things connected to it, is it really sort of creates two broad categories of questions. The first category is kind of what we've been talking about, which is the industry content, the context, the reality of the industry, and what this looks like as an impact. But I think there's also the thing that we have to call out, which is the direct impact to current customers. Like, this is something that's going to impact actual people who have deployed this in actual places. And so there's also this huge issue, this area of issues that unfortunately is sort of its own black box because it is a proprietary thing and because it's not done in the clear. There's a lot of questions for customers. So I'd like to ask you all a couple questions, very sort of customer facing. And we'll go ahead and start with Drew, because I think you've had a lot of conversations with people sort of adopting solutions. Do you think for a plant or OT team that is deeply standardized on Kepware for connectivity, are there looming big concrete risks that are coming during this transition period? And completely out of the like theoretical, oh, this may happen. Are there like concrete risks, things that people should be actually concerned about?
Yeah, I think for me, it's we don't know the roadmap of where they're going to take Kepware. I think, coming from what its premise was, which was a protocol translator, I think today where Kepware is failing is event-based transactions and actually being able to support something like an MES system for events that are happening on the floor. And as far as someone that's concerned for today that's heavily standardized on Kepware, it's like, are you guys going to invest in this and make this happen in the platform? Because these are, now modern needs for our business, where in the past we didn't need that kind of data. We just needed time streams. We need data streams, where now we need event-based, transactions, and where you're taking a risk of, are they actually even going to bite that off?
Right.
So
right. I mean, there is the reality, and I sort of hinted at this earlier in the slides. Kepware is from 1995, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad solution. Like, I'm older than 1995, and I don't think I'm a bad solution, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. But it does seem like an antiquated solution for things that are like actually modern problems. So I do wonder that the sort of the concrete risks that we're looking at, the unknowns of what this looks like, the proprietary nature of the system, the sort of lacking transparency, and then the reality that like this is an older program. Now, are they going to get money to modernize, or are they going to have to fight, PE for that money? I am interested for you all whether you see this as sort of those issues are particular to just this incident, or the sale, or do you think that this is something that's going to keep happening with additional consolidation, that this is sort of a trend in the industry that customers are just going to have to get used to? Like, is this a microcosm of the broader issue? How do you feel about that?
Well, I will say it is something that happens quite often in industrial automation, especially on the lower levels of the stack. I mean, you look at Aviva, that's how they built their business. Same with Beckhoff. Um, as well as even Rockwell, they're gobbling up a lot of their competitors, like for example, FactTalk Optics. That's what they're doing. So this is something that does happen often in industry, but it's more of a question of, does it make sense for the solution stack and for the what they're providing, that whoever is buying them. And for TPG, I don't know that it makes sense. They're not trying to create a whole cohesive solution, kind of like what Aviva tries to do or Rockwell tries to do. It seems like they're just capitalizing on an industry where it's hard to replace this layer. So connecting, collecting is difficult, and basing your architecture off of this, antiquated software is a risk, in my opinion.
Right.
And then to that point, PTC has quite a few opportunities to cross-sell with products, right? So it also, the way they structured their company, ThingWorx and Kepware, they were different teams and organized in their own way, but they did still cross-sell. TPG seems to not cross-sell across their portfolio companies. So there's less opportunity to use the businesses you already have as customers to cross-sell. I think that's also a missed opportunity for people that bought into PTC as an ecosystem versus now you're buying Kepware solely. And the additional benefits of being able to have Kepware and ThingWorx work really well. You might keep those, you might not. We'll see about that. Jury's still out. But the rest of the suite of PTC, which has some phenomenal products in there, they will likely lose the proximity to the rest of the products, and therefore also you lose strength of integration and otherwise.
Right. And I do want to highlight, because I've seen this come up a couple times, and in fact I've seen it in the chat a few times. There is this sort of sentiment that well, let's assume things are going to be okay, or let's assume like things get better, or it might get better because they have more money. The weird thing about these private equity sort of acquisitions is we actually do have a track record to look at. We can look at the way that TPG has functioned in the past. We can look at the way that these acquisitions have gone in the past. They are generally not great. That doesn't mean that they're always going to be not great, but they generally, in these sort of situations, lend themselves to issues. So there is this sort of vocal minority, I think, that's arguing like stay the course. And so ZJ, I think for you, like, how would you answer that claim? Hey, you should just stay the course. And
yeah, so I understand the hot take there. The thing is, though, like the TPG has a lot of companies under their wings, and if you look at PE and how they structure things, about 20% of their businesses are okay to not yield more money, and the rest just needs to be much more successful. There is a very good chance that, like, they bought Kepware, ThingWorx, etc., because they have reason to believe it's worth the money, right? So no one is going to buy a product and just kill it outright. I think the first year after the acquisition actually closes is the year where you really want to understand, okay, what's going on and how are they going to play this? So for PTG, it is really, what is your first move? And I'm not an exec there, but if I were, I would plan it very carefully, also to understand, to make people understand this is the playbook we're going to roll out. We're in a game of like who blinks first, customers versus the leadership now at ThingWorx or Kepware. And for the industry at large, I really hope that there is a bona fide case where the pipeline for new business was so overwhelming and PTC just wanted to focus on PLM. If that's not the case, we'll definitely know before the summer. You'll just feel and see it. You'll probably see people leave within PTC. You'll probably see other changes in terms of pricing, or they structure new products around what was now in the base tier, and now they SaaSify something. It is really about, up until the summer, you'll see a couple of press releases and an event probably, and that's where yeah, we'll see who blinks first. The thing is, Drew earlier talked about obsolescence. Like, that is one of the things you do always have to keep in mind. Is this the pick for the next 10 years? Yeah, the next 6 months, pay close attention. It might be, there might also be an opportunity to change up. And then if we look at solutions where Node-RED is deployed, there is usually already a couple solutions in place, and not a lot of standardization. What you could do is just keep training people on multiple solutions, so you have strategic options and optionality in case you want it or need it to go one direction or another.
Yeah. So off of that, because part of the difficulty of this is that this is sort of a closed deal. We don't actually know everything that's happening behind the scenes. We have to do a lot of guesswork. So Drew, I would be interested in your view on this. What kind of technical debt and architectural constraints do you think that TPG is inheriting with this? Because obviously, someone buys a company, they're going to allocate money in the best way that they can. And like, there may be great modernization efforts, there may be great things that, if they are actually serious about growth, that they invest in, but that may not necessarily be what everybody is expecting or wanting. So what do you view their sort of debts they're taking on, and the long-term growth plan to look like?
Yeah. So for me, the big one, especially with acquisitions, because I've actually been through a few of them when I worked in aviation space, and that is, you lose a lot of not only technical debt of like what it's built on. So it's built on a .NET framework. So when you talk about integrating AI and having a chat function that helps you build some conversions or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
those are not going to be available out of the box. It's going to take a lot of rework to get that there. The other piece that I think a lot of people miss, especially with acquisitions, is, and ZJ talked about it just a second ago, is you get a turnover of engineers and people who have been committed to these projects for a long time. So that tribal knowledge, if they didn't do a good job with documentation, it takes a long time to spin up new engineers. Even if they decide to bite off, revolutionizing this and bringing it up to modern standards, they've also got to fight the piece of the information they're now missing because of the acquisition and the changeover of hands. I'm hoping they do a good job at keeping these engineers on board and keeping them engaged, but a lot of times they just get a bad taste in their mouth and move on. So
Right. Now, this is shifting gears just a little bit. This is something that I feel like a lot of people's initial reactions were very couched in. This is now an open source, closed source thing. This is the proprietary versus non-proprietary. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Nick, how, you could argue either way. I do want to ask you directly, like, in many ways, this does seem for a lot of people to be representative of that bigger closed source, open source debate. Do you think that's fair to lump that into this, or is this a separate standalone thing, or is it a little bit more complicated than just yes or no?
I'm sure, yeah, it's going to be far more nuanced than a simple yes or no. But I think, as we've said, it does, any shift like this, change in ownership, does raise those questions of what shifts in strategic interests that may bring. What that does to the roadmap. It could bring positive impact. Let's not, let's not make it sound all negative, for sure. But the fact is, and as Drew said, we don't really know all the details of the deal. We don't know what their plans are longer term. So, it does feel at that timely moment, whether it's this deal or something else related to closed source solutions out there of the it is that opportunity to just reflect on whether the value of a closed source solution versus an open source solution how does it change the algebra of what's the right solution for an organization to adopt. Thinking about that the long-term stability, the having confidence of something still being around, the ability to replace it or swap it out for an alternative, all those sorts of considerations are there. And obviously with the open source hat on, that's one benefit of an open source is not being tied to a particular vendor in your technology choices. But there are trade-offs all along the way. But having building on an open base does certainly remove some of that lack of clarity and uncertainty about what could happen down the line when decisions are being made at a commercial interest level. I think obviously with FlowFuse, yes, we're commercializing open source, and that is in our own interest, but there's a degree with open source that we can focus on the building the right technical solution for real problems, and doing that in the open so that people can have confidence about the pedigree and the quality of the open source code, because those are the sorts of considerations people are weighing up, open versus closed. There's all sorts in certain industries, governance challenges, you've got confidence on quality and all those sorts of things, and there are certainly pros and cons both ways.
Right. So speaking of transparency, clarity, all of those things, we obviously have the complexity here that we're not privy to a lot of these conversations. This is not the company. We did not sell the company. And so we can only see what we're observing and then make our sort of estimates off of that. Now I'm going to ask you all to do something even more extreme, which is look into the future. I want you to put your tech oracle hats on and look way into the future. Look into what that may look like. And ZJ, I'd like to start with you specifically. You talked a little bit about PE earlier, and I'd love to know what you feel the future of Kepware and ThingWorx and just that whole sort of group, what those teams look like with this new focus on financial performance under PE. And really specifically, I'd love to know, do you think that could accelerate innovation, or do you think this is going to be a net negative in the wash?
Yeah, I almost sound like a broken record, but it could be both. And the next year is going to tell. If you are... So, okay, look at FlowFuse. We're VC funded. That means if we do really well, it is doable for us to get more capital, to invest more, to grow even faster, or keep that momentum going. The same can be said for private equity. They are very incentivized to make something that work better. That also means if it doesn't work, you get very little to no attention. So if the pipeline is as solid as the buyer thinks it is, and they can grow it, and they can SaaSify it, and they can provide financial performance to the investors, there might be a case that ThingWorx is the leading product again in their category, and Kepware is gonna outperform the whole market. I mean, it might. You would need a great team on site, and then you need to retain them right now, and then execute on a different pace than they used to, I think, in the last 2 years. But if they're managing to do all those above, then there is an opportunity. If they don't, we'll see really quickly. But then you also see quite obvious signs of deterioration. So people will leave in quite large numbers. The downside, if people voluntarily leave a company, the best ones seem to go first because it's for them easiest to find a new job. So then for everyone that's staying behind, you have a less talent dense team. And so achieving your goals with the same team is rather hard, which then brings additional pressure again. And then it becomes a vicious cycle, down. And then you might end up as one of the losers in the portfolio for your PE owner. If you're one of those, there's zero opportunity for them to invest new money into the business. There's zero opportunity for them to extract about the same money they invested right now. Then it becomes damage control. If you're then stuck to those products, it's going to be a painful journey as a customer.
Yeah. And speaking of that painful journey, I think one of the most interesting things about this whole scenario is it's reignited this conversation about what it means to sort of give the reins of your solution to someone else, to someone completely outside of open source visibility, of control of the vendor lock-in of it all. It has sort of reignited this broader question around architecture choices. And specifically, I feel like we're starting to see a growing movement towards open, flexible, vendor neutral, as opposed to like, yes, this is a Flash landing page. I'd love to go use them. So Nick and Drew specifically, I think you both probably have two sides of the same coin view on this. When you look at the openness that we've built into Node-RED and FlowFuse, that whole sort of openness in industrial environments, both in how it's built and how it's worked. What would you say to people going through this? Like their vendor strategies are shifting. How would you sell them on this idea of, okay, well, your architectural choice should be open. It shouldn't be locked into this vendor thing, and it shouldn't be a black box thing, no matter how flashy the landing page is.
I think the main thing I can reflect on is the last 13 years of the Node-RED project, and reflecting on why it has seen the growth it has. And I think one of the very early choices we made, both technically, architecturally, but also as sort of governance policy around the project, was for us not to gatekeep what integrations, nodes, modules people could write. So we opened that up so that the community could start building their own integrations, and we wouldn't have got to the 5,000 however many third-party nodes that the community have built over that time. And that has been one of the success stories of Node-RED being open source. Just it empowers developers to extend it how they need it to be extended. Now, for some industrial customers, that flexibility doesn't naturally mean that they have the wherewithal to build those integrations. They want these integrations to just work. And so they will always look to vendors to provide supported solutions. But even then, whether it's the Node-RED community, whether it's FlowFuse, our certified nodes that we can layer on top of that, it gives the wherewithal to know that it's technically simple to extend the Node-RED platform, and that there's already a very active community of people doing just that, and there are options to layer above that in terms of bringing some of the value that proprietary closed source solutions bring to the open source world. So being able to bring support, being able to bring code you can trust and rely on that. And it's a very sort of technical answer from open source, but that's been the success story of Node-RED and why it has seen the adoption it has. And I think that is with the customers we talk to, with even the non-FlowFuse, just the Node-RED community people we talk to, that flexibility often comes up as one of the big differentiators.
And Drew, are you starting to see, because obviously you talk to customers like constantly, and I know that in the past there's been this sort of tendency towards like, oh, well, this vendor said they can do it and their landing page looks beautiful and it's easy and it's cheap the way that they sold it to us and it's great. And like the shoe only drops a year later. Are you now seeing like more appetite for resolving that issue from the get-go, for going open from the beginning, for really thinking about it in a more complex and more sort of holistic way?
Yeah, I'm not seeing a shift where middleware is thought about in the beginning yet. However, I think as people are using these systems over time, and let's say they're in a factory for 10 years, and now we're building such amazing machines that last so long, they're starting to realize that what a good architecture looks like is not taking all of the software from one vendor and putting it in my factory. It's actually taking and getting the best solution pieces of software at the time, and then architecting a way to connect these things that will stay over the next 20 years. So a good example of this is, so every solution is temporary. So AI tools are temporary. We've seen that recently with ChatGPT and Gemini and all those things in kind of the personal space and how quickly they move out. Well, industrial automation is 10 years behind it. So you can kind of expect that same thing to happen here. But what stays almost every time is the middleware. So, when we work with customers and they're replacing some cloud platform and they're putting FlowFuse in there to do monitoring of their devices down low, generally their first instinct is to keep Kepware. And they're like, wait, I didn't know you guys could do an OPC server. And because their instinct is like, why would I replace that? It's so difficult to connect and collect again. I'm definitely seeing a shift where people are starting to understand that these connector pieces are so important. But what we're trying to teach and what I'm trying to teach customers as well is that foundational piece of going with an open architecture is what's going to make it so you survive this long-term obsolescence and be able to make sure that this thing is going to continue to get updates and that I'm going to continue to be able to connect to stuff. And I'm not beholden to some other person that's like, no, you can't connect to that. They're not in our vendor list. Good luck.
So let's get practical then, because I think a lot of what we've been talking about has been very sort of esoteric potentials. Maybe, maybe this will happen, maybe it won't. If you're an engineering leader at a manufacturing company, and this is for all of you, I'd love all of your opinions. If you're an engineering leader at a manufacturing company, you're running Kepware today, and you're seeing this news, and you're thinking, well, maybe I should explore some alternatives. What should that exploration look like? Like, what should you be evaluating and what questions should you be asking? And this is, again, just within the context that there are people who have been using Kepware or versions of it since the 90s or early thousands. And so they may not know where to even start. So what should they be evaluating? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, so for me, what you should be looking for is something that does protocol conversion and has the not only protocol conversion and a wide variety of protocol conversion, but also if I have something I need to connect to, the ability to develop my own if I have to. A lot of these old antiquated systems have really old protocols and they may not be supported by newer platforms. So having the ability to build my own protocols on that platform. The next one would be flexibility in deployment. So deploying on a Windows machine, deploying on Linux, deploying on Docker. Docker, and especially industrial automation, is making huge headway into that space. It's no longer just Hyper-V and ESXi anymore. We're expanding into other lands. So having that flexibility of multiple deployments. And then the next one I would say is transparency and open architecture. So there's been a few examples in the past where people have sold softwares and then come to find out 5 years later they were, by architectural design, they weren't great and they were never going to last anyway. The other thing is I would take a look at, so a lot of people are looking at just protocol conversion. I would also start to be looking for a solution that does event-based driven transactions. So, it's no longer just I need to connect PLC to SCADA. It's now I need to connect, PLC and something that happened there to my MES system or an ERP system or some sort of enterprise reporting, something that's not just time-based, but is also event-driven and be able to handle those types of transactions.
Yeah.
I agree on the point of forward compatibility. Very often with software buy, people are like, okay, what is my backwards compatibility and how much of my old assets can I bring along? I think with open source and the ability to build your own connectivity, forward compatibility is also, well, at least, yeah, you don't know what you need to build in the future, but at least you have the option to do so. And then if the vendor doesn't step up of that new hardware or that new software piece that you want to integrate with, you always have the flexibility to do so yourself, especially as these days the major manufacturers do both now have IT on staff that can build the software and also contribute this back to the community and make this available for the wider community, because ultimately the IP isn't their it isn't the differentiating factor. What they ultimately produce and how well you produce it, that is what those IT people are great at, and improving those. So keeping the community going there on the open source front is really yeah, really, really good to see. And also longer term, the more you dive into the infrastructure layer for IT, but also OT, almost all new PLCs are just Linux boxes these days. Yes, they have modifications, but under the hood, it's all open source. A lot of historians are being replaced with just a Postgres instance because they're really good also at time series data and otherwise. So more and more, the foundational Lego bricks of your solution are becoming open source. And as an ex-engineer, I really love to see that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also to a degree of just empowering your engineers with the flexibility to build their solutions, and having something that again, I keep coming back to where I see the successes with Node-RED is often we'll see people bring it in to solve problem A, and then they'll just suddenly realize, well, if I've got this flexible platform sat there in my architecture, I can now actually go and solve all these other problems that weren't so possible when I had a particular a proprietary bit of software that just solved problem A. That's great, that solved that problem. But if I swap in Node-RED, I can now solve problem A just the same way. But I've also got a lot more capability and flexibility, and and empower your engineers to actually find a lot more value from the system through that flexibility. And then that's not specific to Kepware or any of the other ones we're talking to, but one of the values of an open platform, a flexible platform, is the discovered value beyond just solving that immediate need that you realize over time.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a purely theoretical exercise. It's going to be a long-reaching question, but I'm interested to see what you all think the industry looks like 12 to 18 months from now. This is obviously a big shakeup. These also tend to happen in groups, like there is a big acquisition and then other companies start looking at being acquired, and it's sort of sometimes it tacks on, sometimes it doesn't. So what do you think 12 to 18 months from now, the industrial connectivity landscape looks like? Are we expecting more consolidation, more fragmentation? Do you feel like people are going to see this and go, oh my God, and now there's a renaissance of open platforms? Like what does that look like in the sort of short, medium, and long term?
Just on the business perspective, there is now a price set on certain revenue. So like insiders will know how much revenue there was in all those free properties that are being sold, what their growth curve was, and now implicitly there's a price set. So that does have a lot of people thinking, okay, if this is the price, then we are valued at X, as other businesses try to see like where's exit liquidity for us, or for other PE firms, they'll also just do the maths. Okay, let's figure out if this is a playbook that we can also copy. So probably in the short term, with such a headline sale, you will see, well, at least people now will have an office somewhere and do the maths and be in Excel. I'm quite certain of that. And then if there's more arbitrage opportunities in the market where PE thinks, hey, we can extract more, you'll only see those about a year or later from the moment that they start working, because it's quite a lengthy process, right? And also it's a lot of money to actually spend. So you need to be sure, and then need to talk to the seller if they're actually for sale. So whatever happens, and the consequences of this will not happen in the next 6-7 months, and probably a year from now. And then in the question of consolidation versus fragmentation, there's always startups, there's always new companies being started in an industry. So fragmentation will always continue in a certain way, and then it's up to them to provide value to the customer and be very successful, so they continue to like fragment the market. And then as they become successful, that's only when there's enough hooks for PE or a PTC to buy someone else or something along those lines, or Rockwell to make an acquisition. So I don't think there's a large macro trend towards consolidation, and Rockwell's going to buy everything that PTC did, and like Siemens also buys a lot of companies, right? They have a whole merger and acquisition branch of the business. But there will always be the case, and they'll always look for good opportunities. That doesn't say this headline opportunity now that has been captured by PE is the new rule, and that's the only route forward, and everything will consolidate.
Just to jump in quickly there, I think that's also very true of obviously, it was the TC acquisition was newsworthy news and generated a lot of discussion. It's triggered us to have this conversation today, but yeah, I'm sure there's also a degree of being realistic of as EJ said, it's going to take time to see what the true consequences of this are. And I think my clear sense right now is it's a timely reminder with any of your technology choices, whether it's this acquisition, whether it's where you see commercial companies doing the sort of open source approach where they end up relicensing and the things that can trigger. That it's always a timely reminder of just thinking about the governance of the technology you're using and what your choices are moving forward.
So just real quick, I'll weigh on this a little bit. So for 12 to 18 months, as far as the connectivity space goes for industrial automation, I think a big thing that everyone's trying to figure out is how AI fits into this, and it's coming into this industry. And there's going to be use cases that are used across the board. So for example, like interfacing with humanoid robots, like what are they going to require? Are they going to require MCP nodes? Are they going to require different architecture? And the big thing is going with platforms that are going to be able to enable you to use these tools, because they're going to be required. If your competitor's doing it, you're going to have to do it. So going with a middleware solution that is on the roadmap and has these things in mind, so integrating AI tools and MCP and whatnot is, I think, going to be very important very soon here. The question is, so I'm a little optimistic, and I would love to see, humanoid robots within the next year. I don't know. We'll see if it actually happens, but I think it's going to be a topic very soon here.
So I do want to get to our Q&A soon, because we actually have quite a lot of questions, but I think the sort of last thing that I would ask you all in this format is sort of an elevator pitch of sorts. This is obviously something people are very concerned about. This has been a huge change, lots of unknowns. So elevator pitch. Let's say someone, this is scary. They need to make an org change. They want to leave Kepware. Obviously, we would advocate nodered and FlowFuse. What is your best sort of 30-second elevator pitch to them, either for FlowFuse and Node-RED, or just for open source solutions in general?
Just reading some of the comments, and I think there've been a couple of comments made. It doesn't have to be an either or type conversation. I think there's at technology level, there everything has a different sense of strength, and they are often complementary. So looking at how can things like FlowFuse, Node-RED work alongside existing solutions. It's when you start thinking about, if this is triggering thoughts about, oh, should I rip and replace? It's like, well, you don't need to rip and replace. There's a place for both, and you can evaluate both alongside each other, and they can work in tandem and complement each other, giving you, in some degree, the best of both worlds. That's always going to be true, whatever sort of technologies you're looking at. And again, to ring the open source bell, the flexibility of open source makes it far easier to have that complementary architecture rather than pitching solutions against each other as you must either do it one way or another. I think there's a lot of value to be had of finding that way to evolve your architecture. And to the comments that you made, in the industrial space, these are architectures that need to be stable. You can't be constantly having to upgrade them. You can't be constantly having to rip and replace. You need predictable stability, and having an approach that gives you that ability to evaluate solutions against each other, connect them together, cooperate with each other. That's the sort of flexibility that brings a lot of value.
And also, like, if you were 20 years ago adopting Kepware, there was no real open source thing available. So saying you did something wrong where, like there was no alternative, like there was no choice. Going forward, is open source. Is it nice to have an escape hatch to say, okay, this vendor that, for example, FlowFuse, if you for some reason want to opt out, then you can drop back to open source nodered, and having that escape hatch is very powerful and gives you strategic options. Would that be ideal going forward? If you have the opportunity, definitely consider that and take that with you in your buying decision. But then, best in breed tools are always going to win.
For me, I would say just good architecture is every solution is temporary. So MES, SCADA, IoT platforms, AI tools, they're just guests on your platform. The only permanent resident is your middleware. So connecting, collecting layer, and moving things around. For me, it's not like, hey, let's go rip and replace this right now. It's adding a tool to your tool belt and embracing something that is open source and that you can bet on for the time, the long term, that it's going to be supported. So as you having that tool and solving these problems is going to by nature just make it through your organization. I can tell you plenty of instances where I've integrated stuff where I've had to augment its Kepware's capability with Node-RED, or even go with completely different platforms because it just couldn't do what I needed an open platform to do.
Awesome. Let's go through the Q&A topics real quick because there's quite a bit of them. So I'm just going to go sort of rapid fire. Anyone can answer any question that they like. The first question that we got was around the sort of claim that this, or the assumption in a lot of circles, that this is by default a net negative. That this thing, like, could it be bad? Yes. Will it be? Nobody knows. I'd like to get your all's reaction to that. Like, what is your gut reaction to what this will look like in the long term for Kepware and ThingWorx customers?
I've never worked at private equity run organizations, but VC, yes, venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are very extreme in their like 20% of our portfolio should do really, really well, and then the rest, whatever. PE is more like 80-20. So if you're in the 80% and then the best one of those 8 other companies, then it might be a very positive thing, and they'll have the money and be very well funded. But then there's very little strategic room to actually fail compared to venture capital funded companies. It is. I said this before, right? But the jury's out. And
right.
Like the next year is gonna be the year that you can really see the signals.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Immediate reactions? My concern is exactly that, the private equity of it, that there is now this question of it has to make money, right? And that could be good or that could be bad.
But also, Christopher, you're also paid, so we also need to make money, right?
Yes, of course. Of course.
But I think the key point is, I don't think we are claiming this is a disaster or this is an awful time. I think it is. I think we're just highlighting it is raising questions, and as CJ had said, it's going to take time for those answers to become apparent. But it's an opportunity to, with those questions being asked, just to highlight what other options, what other questions that naturally fall out from that.
So this is a broader technical question, specifically around the open source paradigm, and it's around addressing the multitude of OEM flavors and low-level protocols that Kepware supports. How do we support that sort of thing in Node-RED and FlowFuse? I think the obvious answer is community nodes, but I will leave that to Nick. This sounds like something for you.
Yeah, I think there is no doubt that some of these systems that have been around for a very long time are able to build integrations with proprietary systems more easily, particularly if it's non-standard based communication. But as we look to the shift, a lot more standardization, OPC UA and other things like that. For all the strengths and all their faults, there is definitely been more of a move to standardized protocols and devices wanting to be to provide more open interfaces. Yeah,
Mm.
there is the wherewithal to build custom nodes for custom protocols. And as an open source community, it's very much driven on what the user needs are and what the demand is around that.
Yeah,
Can I just quickly plug certified nodes?
absolutely.
Okay, so we are soon going to launch certified nodes, which is a way to work with both the open source community and the proprietary nodes that are out there to make those available to FlowFuse customers at large. So if you pick an OPC UA node that we can guarantee you it will work for the next 3 years, that's probably where we want to start. But ultimately, we want to increase that year over year to hopefully someday a decade. So if you install something and that comes from the certified nodes catalog that we maintain, that we will work with the community to make sure that for the next decade, you might have to do an upgrade of dependencies, and there might be some patterns that need small alterations because they were unsecure, for example. But ultimately, the goal is to make those changes as minimal as possible so you can just build the solution and then get on with the rest of the job.
Now, one of the questions that popped up in here is around AI, specifically around whether this acquisition, I mean, obviously, TPG has, AI portfolio things. Everybody does these days. Do you think that this is signaling the possibility of more AI in Kepware? Do you think that's a good thing to build more AI into industrial things? And then obviously we're building a bunch of AI stuff, so I'd love to get your all's opinion on the just sort of broad-based industrial AI promise.
I mean, I don't think the acquisition is a particular signal around AI, because I think, as you say, AI is the trend and is the new technology on the block across every sector, across every industry, and trying to work out what makes sense, how AI can be brought to bear to solve problems. Actually provide. It's not AI for AI's sake. It's how can AI be brought to bear to actually solve genuine problems more effectively. And I think that that's going to be true across the board, both with what we're doing in FlowFuse, but I think every stack you're going to see the integration of AI. It's certainly interesting in the industrial space. Typically, there's a conservativeness around technology choices and the need for, particularly when you're looking at PLC control systems, you need strong determinism on behavior and all those sorts of things. So it's there are certainly challenges, but on the understanding what's going on, analyzing, diagnosing, I think there's a huge space there that the AI will be brought to bear. But I personally wouldn't see this acquisition as a forebear of that. I think that's just going to be happening of its own accord.
Regardless. Yeah. So I'm gonna ask one more question here just to be respectful of everyone's time. For the rest of the questions that we have in Q&A, I will go ahead and get answers from the team and we will share those out. But I think an important question here and the sort of capstone of this, do you think that there needs to have an industry change within the industry to how we look to open source solutions? In my opinion, it's being viewed as not mature enough. And I think that is sort of a broad base thing within this whole Kepware conversation is a lot of people would say, oh, open source isn't mature enough. What is everyone's reaction to that?
Something like 80% of all servers run Linux these days. I would be guessing that every bit that even this Zoom stream transmits has been touched by an open source TPC stack. TCP, my bad. I'm swapping the abbreviations after today. But I like the core change for industry is if you look at like digital SaaS companies that build their whole platform on a Ruby on Rails or some open source framework with an open source database and Linux as the driver, they usually have a very large support staff there as well, where in industry the staff is usually a little smaller. So a large manufacturer might have 15, 20 ITers on staff just to connect OT to IT. For them, it is more of a burden to adopt anything that just creates uncertainty. And I think for open source, not having a marketing team and not having like the effort and the sales reps, etc., to provide the certainty in a demo or a call, it's a bit of a disadvantage, and that's where open source will just ride it out in terms of time. But I do expect more of the Lego bricks coming from the bottom up become more and more open source. So you got MQT these days, which is open source. The spec for OPC UA is open source. I'm quite certain. Like it's still hard to get anything done with OPC UA without paying, but like there's more and more bricks there on the connectivity layer as well. The data storage InfluxDB is an open core company. You can use it without paying Influx a dime. So this Lego like pyramid, so to speak, it just keeps building, and then in the end, everyone looks back. It's like, oh, it's all just open source.
I think we all just are sort of like thumbs up. Yes, agree. 100%.
I think so.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so much of it. If anyone is like a big Linux fan, you've obviously seen the ethos of that for a long, long time. Like it is a shockingly mature thing that for whatever reason just gets the rap of not being. So yeah, that was a great question. So as I said, all the rest of these questions that are here, I am going to answer them. I'll go ahead and get answers from the team. We'll drop them in a Reddit thread. I'll put it up today. And with that, we'll go ahead and close QA, and we'll actually close out the whole session. So I just want to thank everybody for coming here and joining us. Don't leave just yet. A short survey is going to pop up after we close the session. It's only going to take about a minute. And like I said, feedback is super instrumental to what we're doing here. I want to thank all of our panelists for the awesome conversation. This is all obviously a lot of people are concerned, and this is all very insightful and very supportive of them. So I hope it was incredibly helpful for you all. And I just want to say again, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, ZJ. So yeah, if you're watching this and if it's inspired you to make the jump to nodered and FlowFuse, feel free to let us know in the survey. You can always check us out at flowfuse.com. There's a whole library of content of my face on the YouTube FlowFuse page, so you should go check out that content as well. And you can definitely get in contact with us on the site. We have a contact us at flowfuse.com/contact us. It's also in the upper right of the website, or you can book a demo when it suits you. So we've dropped both links in the chat for your convenience, but definitely reach out. Thanks again for everyone coming, and until the next deployment.